Have you ever been waiting for someone, maybe at a cafe or at a bus stop, and suddenly realized that you had absolutely nothing to do? No messages to answer. No interesting notifications. Nothing particularly exciting happening around you. What did you do? If you're like most people, you probably reached for your phone. Maybe you opened Instagram without even thinking about it. Then you closed it. A few seconds later, you opened it again. Perhaps you checked your messages even though you knew perfectly well that nobody had texted you in the last 30 seconds. Or maybe you opened TikTok, YouTube, X, Reddit, whatever your personal escape happens to be. And the interesting thing is that we often do this automatically. We don't necessarily think, I'm going to use my phone now because I have something important to do. Instead, our hand simply reaches for it, almost as if our brain is saying, quick, something is happening, nothing is happening, fix it. That tiny moment of emptiness feels uncomfortable, and that discomfort has a name. Boredom. Most of us have spent our entire lives trying to avoid it. But here's the question I want to explore with you today. What if boredom isn't actually the problem? What if constantly escaping boredom is? Because although boredom has a terrible reputation, psychologists and researchers have become increasingly interested in the possibility that periods of low stimulation may serve an important psychological purpose. And perhaps, in a world where we can entertain ourselves every second of every day, we need boredom more than ever. So today, we're going to do something slightly unusual. We're going to defend boredom. And by the end of this episode, you might even want a little more of it in your life. Think about how different everyday life was just 20 years ago. If you were waiting for a bus, you waited. If your friend was 10 minutes late, you looked around. If you were standing in a supermarket queue, you stared at the products next to the checkout. Maybe you read the ingredients on a shampoo bottle for absolutely no reason. You observed strangers. You looked through the window. You thought about something that happened yesterday. You imagined what you might do tomorrow. Or perhaps you did something even more radical. Nothing. There were small pockets of boredom scattered throughout everyday life, not because people deliberately created them, but because technology hadn't yet eliminated them. Today, those empty moments are disappearing. Waiting for an elevator? Phone. Eating alone? Phone. Going to the bathroom? Phone. Commercial break? Phone. Walking somewhere? Podcast. Cleaning the house? Music. Going to sleep? One final video. And then another. And then somehow it's 1:43 in the morning. We've created an environment in which stimulation is available almost constantly. And don't misunderstand me, stimulation isn't inherently bad. I love music. I love films. I love learning things online. Podcasts themselves are a form of stimulation, including the one you're listening to right now. The problem begins when stimulation stops being something we choose and becomes something we cannot tolerate being without. There's a subtle but important difference. When every quiet moment needs to be filled, silence starts to feel strange. When every moment of waiting requires entertainment, waiting becomes unbearable. And when we're constantly consuming something, our minds rarely get the opportunity to simply wander. That may have consequences. Let's talk about what boredom actually feels like. It's surprisingly difficult to describe. You're not necessarily sad, you're not necessarily tired, you're not necessarily anxious. You're just understimulated. You want to engage with something, but nothing around you seems sufficiently interesting. Psychologists often describe boredom as an unpleasant state in which we want to engage in a satisfying activity but struggle to do so. That distinction matters. Boredom isn't simply having nothing to do. You can have hundreds of things to do and still feel bored, and you can have absolutely nothing to do without feeling bored at all. Imagine sitting beside the sea at sunset. Technically, you're doing nothing, but you might feel peaceful. Now imagine sitting through a 3-hour meeting about a topic you don't care about. You're technically doing something, but you may be painfully bored, so boredom is less about activity itself and more about engagement. Your brain wants something meaningful to focus on. When it can't find that thing, it becomes restless, and that restlessness can be surprisingly powerful. In fact, researchers have conducted experiments in which participants were left alone in a room with almost nothing to do. In one famous line of research, some participants were given the option of administering an unpleasant electric shock to themselves. You might assume nobody would choose that. After all, why would you deliberately shock yourself? But some participants did. They preferred an unpleasant sensation to sitting quietly with their own thoughts. Think about that for a second. Doing nothing can feel so uncomfortable that some people would rather experience physical discomfort. And although that's an extreme experimental situation, I think there's something very recognizable about it. Maybe we don't shock ourselves. We refresh Instagram. We open the refrigerator even though we're not hungry. We check our email for the 5th time. We start cleaning something. We send someone a random message. Anything to avoid that strange emptiness. But perhaps that discomfort exists for a reason. Think about hunger. Hunger isn't pleasant, but hunger itself isn't necessarily a problem. It's a signal. Your body is telling you, hey, we need energy. Thirst works similarly, so does physical pain. These uncomfortable sensations provide information. Some psychologists argue that boredom may function in a comparable way. Boredom might be your brain saying, this isn't satisfying. Find something more meaningful. In that sense, boredom can act as a motivational signal. Imagine you've spent 40 minutes scrolling through short videos. At first, it's entertaining. But eventually you begin to feel strangely dissatisfied. Nothing is particularly wrong. You're just done. That feeling might push you toward another activity. Maybe you finally start reading the book on your desk. Maybe you call a friend. Maybe you go outside. Maybe you start working on an idea you've been postponing. Boredom creates pressure for change. And sometimes we need that pressure. The problem is that modern technology allows us to silence the signal almost immediately. You're bored? Here's another video. Still bored? Here's another. And another. And another. The discomfort disappears temporarily, but the underlying dissatisfaction may remain. It's a little like being hungry and eating sweets all day. You're technically consuming food, but you're not necessarily giving your body what it needs. Similarly, endless stimulation can keep the mind occupied without necessarily making it fulfilled. There's an important difference between being occupied and being engaged. We often confuse the two. Have you ever had a great idea in the shower? It's almost a click at this point. People joke about shower thoughts, those strange insights that appear while you're shampooing your hair. But why does this happen? Why don't our best ideas always appear when we're sitting at a desk desperately trying to think? One explanation involves something called mind wandering. When you're doing a simple activity that doesn't require much attention, showering, walking, washing dishes, staring out of a train window, your mind becomes less focused on the immediate environment. Thoughts begin to move more freely. One memory reminds you of another. An idea connects to something you heard 3 weeks ago. A problem you've been struggling with suddenly looks different. Your mind starts making associations that might not occur when you're intensely focused. It's a bit like giving your brain permission to explore without telling it exactly where to go. And boredom can create the conditions for this. When there isn't enough external stimulation, attention often turns inward. You start thinking, remembering, imagining, planning, reflecting. Sometimes worrying too, of course. We'll come back to that. But mind wandering isn't simply wasted mental activity. It can contribute to creativity, autobiographical reflection, future planning, and problem solving. Your brain is still working. It's just working differently. Let's imagine 2 situations. In the first, I give you 10 minutes and say, come up with an interesting idea. You sit at your desk. There's a laptop in front of you. Your phone is beside you. Notifications are appearing. You have 7 browser tabs open. Music is playing. Now compare that with another situation. I take your phone away. No computer, no television, nothing to read. You're sitting alone with a notebook, and I leave you there for 30 minutes. The first 5 minutes might feel terrible. What am I supposed to do? Then maybe you draw something, you write a sentence, you look around, you think about something completely unrelated, and then an idea appears. Not because boredom magically makes everyone a genius, but because your mind finally has room to generate rather than consume. And I think that distinction, generating versus consuming, is extremely important. Most digital entertainment puts us into consumption mode. Someone else creates the image. Someone else chooses the music. Someone else tells the story. Someone else provides the joke. Someone else decides what appears next. We receive. And again, there is nothing inherently wrong with consuming things. But if we spend nearly every empty moment consuming other people's thoughts, when exactly are we supposed to encounter our own? Creativity requires input, certainly. You can't create from absolutely nothing, but creativity also requires incubation. You need time for ideas to settle, combine, and transform. Boredom can provide that incubation period. There's a reason childhood boredom is often associated with creativity. Maybe you've heard a child say, "I'm bored." And what do adults usually respond? Find something to do. Sometimes that's exactly what happens. The child complains for 10 minutes, then they find a cardboard box. Suddenly the box is a spaceship. Then it's a house. Then it's a shop. Then somehow the family cat has been recruited as an employee. The point is that boredom forces the child to generate stimulation rather than receive it. When entertainment isn't immediately provided, imagination has to participate. Of course, I'm not suggesting children should never watch television or play video games. That would be an entirely different discussion. But there is something psychologically valuable about occasionally having to answer the question, "What can I do?" instead of having an algorithm answer it for you. And adults aren't fundamentally different. We just have better algorithms. Many of the digital platforms we use are designed around one basic goal: keep you engaged. The longer you stay, the more content you consume. The more content you consume, the more advertisements you may see, the more data the platform can collect about your preferences, and the more valuable your attention becomes. So naturally, these platforms have become extremely good at eliminating boredom. Think about short-form video. You don't even need to choose what to watch. Swipe. Video, swipe. Video, swipe. Video, don't like this one? No problem. Half a second later, here's another. Your brain barely has time to become bored before a new stimulus arrives. And the recommendation systems learn, you like cooking, more cooking. You like travel, more travel. You watched 3 videos about a celebrity breakup? Congratulations. Apparently this is your entire personality now. The system doesn't care whether the content is deeply meaningful to you. It cares whether you keep watching. This creates a fascinating psychological environment. For most of human history, interesting stimulation was relatively scarce. Now it's practically infinite. Our attention, however, is not. And that means attention has become something that companies compete for. Your boredom is bad for business. Because a bored person might close the app. They might put the phone down. They might go for a walk. They might think. So every empty second becomes an opportunity to show you something. If we become accustomed to constant novelty, ordinary activities may begin to feel comparatively slow. Reading a book requires patience. A conversation sometimes has pauses. Learning an instrument involves repetition. Studying a language can be frustrating. Building a career takes years. Relationships require us to listen even when the conversation isn't immediately exciting. Real life doesn't change every 15 seconds, and that's a problem if our brains begin expecting it to. Constant exposure to rapidly changing stimulation may make slower forms of engagement feel less rewarding by comparison. You sit down to read. 2 pages later, this is boring. You start studying. 7 minutes later, I need a break. You watch a film. You reach for your phone during the quiet scenes, and perhaps the film isn't boring. Perhaps we've simply become less tolerant of low stimulation. That's an uncomfortable possibility, because many meaningful things in life contain boring parts. Exercise is repetitive. Practicing a skill is repetitive. Writing is repetitive. Studying is repetitive. Maintaining friendships sometimes involves hearing the same story for the 4th time. Success isn't a continuous sequence of exciting moments. A lot of it is repetition. If we cannot tolerate boredom, we may struggle to persist through the unglamorous stages required to become good at something. This connects to another concept: delayed gratification. Delayed gratification is essentially the ability to resist a smaller immediate reward in favor of a potentially greater future reward. You could watch videos now or study for an exam that matters next month. You could spend your money now or save for a trip. You could avoid exercise because it's uncomfortable, or accept temporary discomfort for long-term health benefits. Many worthwhile goals require us to tolerate periods in which the reward isn't immediate, and boredom often appears during those periods. Imagine learning a language. At the beginning, everything is new. Hello, thank you, how are you? You feel progress constantly. Then you reach an intermediate level. Suddenly progress becomes less visible. You're reviewing grammar. You're learning vocabulary you keep forgetting. You're listening to people speak and thinking, why are they talking so fast? This stage can feel repetitive, but if you constantly need novelty, you may abandon the process. So perhaps boredom tolerance is partly about learning to remain present when something isn't immediately rewarding. That's a surprisingly valuable skill. There's another reason we may avoid boredom, and this one is more personal. Sometimes we aren't avoiding boredom itself. We're avoiding what appears when the noise stops. Have you ever noticed that? You're busy all day. Classes, work, messages, videos, music, people, tasks. Then you get into bed. Everything becomes quiet. And suddenly your brain says, "Excellent. Now that I finally have your attention, let's discuss every unresolved problem in your life." Wonderful. Thank you, brain. You remember an embarrassing thing you said 6 years ago. You think about your career, your relationships, money, whether you're making the right decisions, whether people actually like you, whether you remembered to turn the oven off. Silence creates room for thoughts we may have been avoiding, and sometimes that can be uncomfortable. This is why constant stimulation can function as a form of emotional avoidance. If I'm always listening, watching, scrolling, or talking, I never have to be completely alone with myself. Again, distraction isn't always bad. Sometimes we genuinely need a break from difficult thoughts. But if distraction becomes our only coping mechanism, those thoughts don't disappear. They wait. Being alone with your thoughts isn't automatically healthy. For some people, unstructured mental time can lead to rumination. Rumination means repeatedly thinking about the same negative thoughts or problems without moving toward a solution. It's the mental equivalent of walking around the same block again and again. Why did I say that? What if this happens? Why am I like this? What if I fail? What if they misunderstood me? This isn't the kind of mind-wandering we're trying to romanticize. Productive reflection tends to move somewhere. Rumination circles. So if boredom consistently leads you into intense anxiety or repetitive negative thinking, the answer isn't necessarily to sit alone for 5 hours and force yourself to enjoy it. Instead, you might use low-stimulation activities that still provide some structure. Walking is a great example. Cooking, drawing, cleaning, gardening, journaling, doing a puzzle. These activities occupy part of your attention while leaving enough mental space for thoughts to emerge naturally. The goal isn't complete sensory deprivation. It's simply reducing the constant flood of input. At this point, you might be thinking, okay, so should I delete every app, throw my phone into the ocean, and spend 4 hours staring at a wall? No, please don't throw your phone into the ocean. Apart from being expensive, it's probably terrible for the fish. We're not trying to eliminate entertainment. We're trying to restore choice. There's a major difference between saying, "I'm going to watch YouTube for an hour because I enjoy it," and realizing, "I have opened YouTube 6 times today without consciously deciding to." One is intentional. The other is automatic. The objective isn't to make your life boring. It's to stop treating every moment of boredom as an emergency, because boredom passes. That's something we rarely allow ourselves to discover. If you sit without stimulation for a few minutes, the initial restlessness often changes. Your mind adjusts. You notice things, thoughts appear, your attention slows down, but we usually interrupt the process before that happens. The moment boredom arrives, we eliminate it. Here's something you can try. The next time you're waiting somewhere, maybe for a bus, a friend, an appointment, don't immediately take out your phone. Just wait. That's it. You don't need to meditate. You don't need to practice mindfulness. You don't need to turn it into a productivity challenge. Just be bored. Look around. Notice the people. Notice the sounds. Let your mind go wherever it wants. You may feel uncomfortable after 30 seconds. That's interesting. Notice the urge to reach for your phone. You don't have to judge it. Just notice it. Ask yourself, why do I need stimulation right now? Maybe the answer is simply, because I'm bored. Fine, stay bored for another minute. See what happens. It sounds ridiculously easy, and yet for many of us it's surprisingly difficult. Here's another idea that sounds almost irresponsible in our productivity-obsessed culture. Schedule nothing, not rest, not watch a movie, not self-care, nothing. Give yourself 30 minutes with no specific objective. The important part is not immediately replacing the emptiness with your phone. Maybe you'll sit outside. Maybe you'll walk. Maybe you'll make coffee. Maybe you'll start drawing. Maybe you'll suddenly remember something you've been meaning to do. Maybe you'll have an idea, or maybe absolutely nothing interesting will happen. That's okay too. Not every minute needs to produce something. This is another habit modern culture has encouraged, the belief that time must always be optimized. We track our sleep, our steps, our screen time, our productivity, our calories, our habits, our learning streaks. Even relaxation becomes a project. I need to relax efficiently because I have work at 7. There's something almost absurd about it. Human beings aren't machines. Some experiences are valuable precisely because they don't have a measurable outcome. This may be the most interesting part. When external stimulation disappears, internal preferences become easier to notice. Imagine having an entire free afternoon. No obligations, no notifications, no algorithm recommending anything. What would you naturally want to do? That's actually a difficult question, because we rarely experience that situation anymore. Our preferences are constantly being influenced. Watch this, buy this, try this, go here, listen to this, care about this, be angry about this. The internet is constantly offering us desires. Boredom removes some of that external direction. And in the empty space, you might discover what your mind naturally moves toward. Maybe you keep thinking about learning photography. Maybe you want to write. Maybe you realize you haven't called someone you care about. Maybe you're dissatisfied with something in your life. Maybe you discover you're exhausted. Boredom doesn't necessarily give you answers, but it creates enough silence for questions to appear. And questions matter. Now, I don't want to idealize boredom completely. Chronic boredom isn't necessarily beneficial. If someone feels bored with almost everything for long periods, that can be associated with low well-being and other psychological difficulties. There's a difference between temporary boredom and feeling permanently disengaged from life. Temporary boredom can motivate exploration. Chronic boredom can feel empty and distressing. Context matters. A person trapped in a repetitive job they hate doesn't need someone saying, "Actually, boredom is wonderful for creativity." That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about ordinary, temporary moments of understimulation that many of us automatically eliminate. 5 minutes waiting, a quiet walk, eating without watching something, sitting on a train, doing dishes, lying on the sofa for 10 minutes. These small periods may be more valuable than they appear. Do you remember the last time nobody could contact you? Not because you ignored them, because they genuinely couldn't. For many people, that might be difficult to remember. We're reachable almost constantly. Messages follow us everywhere. Work follows us home. News follows us into bed. Other people's lives are available 24 hours a day. This level of connectivity is historically extraordinary and useful, but it also means our attention is constantly accessible to other people. A quiet moment can be interrupted at any time. Maybe one form of modern luxury is simply being temporarily unreachable, taking a walk without your phone, turning notifications off, sitting somewhere without documenting it, experiencing something without immediately thinking about how to share it. There is something deeply peaceful about an experience that belongs only to you. No photograph, no story, no post, no evidence. It happened. You were there. That's enough. I think that's the paradox. Boredom feels empty, but that emptiness can create space. Space for ideas, space for memories, space for reflection, space for curiosity, space for creativity, space to notice your surroundings, space to realize you're tired, space to recognize that you're unhappy with something, space to discover what you actually want. When every gap is immediately filled, we lose some of that space. And maybe that's why doing nothing sometimes feels so unfamiliar. We've forgotten how. So I want to leave you with a challenge. Not a dramatic digital detox. Not 7 days without technology. Nothing extreme. Tomorrow, choose one ordinary moment, just one, maybe your morning coffee, your bus journey, a 10-minute walk, waiting for someone, eating lunch alone, and don't fill it. No podcast, no music, no scrolling, no video, just you and whatever happens around you. At first, you may feel restless. Your hand may automatically move toward your phone. Let it. Then put the phone back. And wait, maybe you'll notice something, maybe you'll remember something, maybe you'll solve a problem, maybe you'll have an idea, or maybe you'll just be bored. And for once, don't treat that as something that needs to be fixed. Because perhaps boredom isn't your brain failing to find something interesting. Perhaps it's your brain asking for enough space to create something interesting of its own. And in a world that is constantly fighting for your attention, choosing to do nothing even for a few minutes might be a surprisingly powerful act. So the next time you're standing in line and instinctively reaching for your phone, maybe stop for a second. Look around. Let your mind wander. Let the moment be slow. Let it be uneventful. Let it be boring. You might be surprised by what happens when nothing happens, and who knows, your next great idea might be hiding there, in the silence, waiting for you to finally get bored enough to hear it.